and the recording has now started. So for today's lecture, my plan is that I'm first going to talk a little bit about the examination that had a deadline this weekend, and I'm going to talk about the examination that is ongoing now, the examination 2. Then we're going to talk a little bit about the quiz. And then before you get started with working on the tasks from lecture 6, I'm also thinking that we can do one example together. And if you have any questions, just write them in the chat and Niklas will answer them for you. But all right, let's start with the examination that we had this weekend, examination 1, or we had the first part of it. And the deadline was Sunday, and there are a few things I want to mention about this. And the first thing I would like to say is that I would like to say a big thank you to my assistants that have looked through all of your solutions that you handed in. And it can be worth mentioning here that they are giving comments on your code and how you write your code, so they are not correcting the assignments or the solutions that you hand in. That is what I will start doing now after the deadline. So they are giving you a comment on your code. And as I said, now I will start looking at them and see if they meet the requirements and so on. But a big thank you to my assistants, especially as there were quite a few solutions to look at. And it is fun to see that there were so many of you handing in solutions. There were in total, and before I say this, as a student, it is easy to think about it from your perspective that you hand in 1 or 2 solutions. But in total, there were 247 solutions handed in, and there were 105 that was handed in for the task that was giving 1 point, the one with the travel company. And there were 87 who handed in the one that gives 3 points, the one where money needs to be transported. And the last one, the one that gives 5 points, the one with the labyrinth, there were 55 of you who handed in. So there were a lot of you who handed in that one. A little surprised, but I'm happy to see it. And if you missed handing in during this part here, so you missed the deadline, there will be re-examinations later on. So you just go into the study guide that you find under modules on Canvas and have a look at when the re-examinations are, what the dates for the re-examinations are. And I've got a few questions. What happens if you have at least one approved task, but you were working on more tasks that you didn't have time to hand in? Or if you handed in a problem that wasn't approved or will not be approved, can you then upload again on the re-examination? And the answer is no. If you have at least one of the problems approved, then you cannot hand in on the re-examination. You can see it as if we have a written test, and when you hand in the written test, that is what is judged. And if you get approved, if you pass it, then you cannot correct the answers that was wrong. So I think that's a good analogy. And I'm just checking the chat at the same time. How many total students? The number of students who handed in, I'm not sure about yet, because I haven't corrected all of the tasks. So I don't know the number of students. So far, I only know the number of solutions handed in. All right. But if you hand it in and you get tasks that was not approved, there is still time to collect the points needed if you're aiming for a particular grade. And do remember that you need at least 5 points for grade 3, 11 points for grade 4, and 18 points for grade 5. And speaking of handing in and speaking of deadlines, there are a few things I would like to mention, a few advice for the future. And it's not just for this course, it's more general. Always keep track of your deadlines. Write them down, add them to your calendar in your phone, put up post-it notes, whatever it takes. Just make sure that you know when the deadlines are and what you should do for that deadline. So always keep track of them. Personally, I add them to the calendar in my phone. I find that very useful for me because I have not always the best memory. And another thing, plan your time so that you're not forced to do something last minute. If there is a deadline for a Sunday evening, set your own deadline to, for example, Friday lunch. If you do this, you have enough time to go over your work one more time. And if you find something that is wrong, you still have time to fix it. So set your deadline to a day or two before the actual deadline and have that as your deadline, your personal deadline. And this one is kind of connected to what I just said, but don't upload in the very last minute. Make sure that you upload well before the deadline, because we can never know if our internet at home goes down or if our computer crashes or if there is some other problem. Then it's nice to have some extra time so you can actually upload before the deadline. And when it comes to the actual tasks, there are 3 things I want to mention. And the first one is if there is a template for the report that you should use, just make sure that you use it, because it's very saddening for us teachers if we see a task that have maybe been solved in the code in a really good way, or it's passable, and then you see that the student haven't handed in the report or haven't followed the guidelines for the report, meaning that you have to fail the task. So always make sure that if there is a template for the report, that you take it serious and use it. And generally speaking, for this first examination, when looking at the report, I will be a little bit nicer and maybe just give you a comment if there is a small problem in it. Of course, it depends on what the problem is. If you hand in an empty report, for example, there's nothing I can do. But if there is some small problem, I can be a little bit nice this first hand in, but just know that for the future ones, I will be a little bit stricter, even when it comes to the small things. And this last thing here, I would like to start by saying that I want you all to hand in your tasks and be approved so that you pass them. That is My goal and my wish that everyone could hand in their tasks and be approved or to pass them. But that will not be the case. And it gives me an opportunity to talk about something that I have mentioned before, but I think it fits to talk about it again here. And that is that we should be structured when approaching solving problems, and use Polya's problem-solving technique. We have practiced, or at least you should have practiced it for a few weeks now when you're solving problems. So always make sure that you understand the problem first, then you devise a plan for how to solve it. Then comes the fun part, to actually write the code according to your plan. And the final step, the fourth step, is to reflect on what you have done. All right, what did I learn from this? But also, did I solve the task that I set out to solve? And don't forget the last step, because it happens to all of us that we write a solution, but it turns out that we didn't solve the problem that we set out to solve. We solved something, but it was not what we were intended to solve. And an example here for this is the task that gives 3 points. If you do the first step to understand the task and then devise a plan, so you do those 2 steps in that order. You first understand the problem, then the second step is to devise a plan, and then using your plan, you write the code. Next, the last step is to reflect on what you did. And here, if you go back, not only looking at your code, but go back and read the task again, make sure that what you created, your solution, fulfills everything that is mentioned in the task. In many cases, at least I shouldn't say in many cases, I should probably say in a few cases, or in some cases, you would realize that you have missed one requirement, to use the 3 loops. And this is a strict requirement that's in there so that I can verify that you can use loops, and that for you to show that you can use loops. So being structured means that we will often catch these, let's call them problems, when we are not solving the task that we think that we are that we should solve. So use a structured approach when solving problems. I see that there was a question here that you should ask me. What's it, Niklas?
It was regarding the re-examination, what kind of tasks they're given to solve.
Okay. So thank you. A good question. The tasks will be the same tasks. So the tasks will not change for the re-examination. For task, let me just see here. There was a question if it was wrong to use more than 3 loops. No, if you have more than 3 loops, it's okay. It's at least 3 loops. So if you have 1 loop for each size of the bag, plus 1 loop for checking that the size was correct that we inputted, that is okay. All right, so I just thought it was good now that we had an example where it clearly benefits us using a structural approach, that we could talk about it again. So remember it for the future. It's good to have a structural approach. All right. Enough about that examination that we had with a deadline that was this weekend. I just want to mention a few things about the ongoing examination 2, the one where you should critically review your friends. And it makes me happy that I see that you have already started with it and that you're giving each other good feedback. It makes me very happy when it's good feedback and when it's constructive feedback and when you're giving advice to each other. So it makes me very happy, and I imagine that it's helpful. And I don't want to give, as I've mentioned before, I will just reiterate it now that it's ongoing so that everyone knows about it. I don't want to guide you or give you instructions on who you should give feedback to, because I think you guys are old enough to decide that on your own, because you might look at it in a few different ways. Maybe you want to look at the solution for the same task as you solved, or maybe you want to look at how your friend solved the task. Or it could be that you struggled a lot trying to solve one of the tasks, but you didn't quite get it, and you would like to see how someone solved it, and see if you could compare and give some feedback there. So you can decide on your own who to give feedback to. You have to give to two other of your friends or two other students, and you can choose who those two are on your own. But this said, if you haven't already started giving feedback, it would be nice if you could select someone who haven't already got feedback, so that we can share our knowledge with as many as possible and that as many of you as possible get some feedback. And don't forget that the deadline for the first part of this critical review is on Sunday at 23:59. So the night between Sunday and Monday, just 1 minute before midnight there. And that is the 3rd of October. So don't forget that deadline. Head right in there, upload one of your tasks, and also give feedback to two other students. And Niklas, is there any questions that I missed so far?
No, I'm trying to answer them here.
All right, cool. Because then I will continue on to the quiz for today. And I think it went very well this week. There were 93 of you who choose to do the quiz, and that is roughly 66% of students registered on the course. And on average, you got 92% correct answers, which is really, really good. Yeah, good work, guys. To those of you who did the quiz, really good. And when I looked at the result, there was no question that a lot of people struggled with. Of course, there was someone who got each question wrong, but generally speaking, there was none of the questions that caused a lot of problems. We will see in the example. We will get back to some of the things that was covered in the quiz. So we will see some of it here today too, or at least I've tried to incorporate it. All right, so for today, you guys have looked at how functions work, and you've seen that there are a few different ways of writing functions. You could return values from functions or not. You could have functions that takes parameters or not. So we can write them in a few different ways. And as I said before in the beginning, before you start working on the tasks from lecture 6, I was thinking that we could do an example together. And this time I have prepared an example. So I will share some code with you guys. Just give me a second here to see if I can actually get it on my screen. now you should be able to see the code. And I was thinking that you can take a minute or two to have a look at the code and try to see if you understand what it does. And then I will be back in, as I said, just a minute or two, and then we will go over it together, and then we'll start making changes to it. So I'll be quiet for a minute or two so you can read it, and then I'll be back.
Yes.
Yes.
I wasn't sure there when on the critical review. Let's say you posted your code and I've commented on your code. Is it required for you to respond on my comment?
No, it's not required to respond on comments, but I think it's a chance to have a discussion if there is something. Maybe there is something I want to ask you when you have given me feedback. So you're more than welcome to engage in a discussion, but it is not required. Do you guys want more time to look at the code, or should I start going over it? Is there anyone who wants more time? Just write something in the chat so I know. Then I'll give you guys a minute or two more. Oh, I don't see any comments, so I will continue and let's look at this code together now that you have glanced over it. So what do we have here? Well, we have a script. We have a script that first have a loop which shows a menu, and we can guess from the name here that it will convert temperatures. And we will see that further down here when we look at the choices that we can make, that we will be converting from Celsius to Fahrenheit. And for the first option here, we can see that what we are doing is that we are reading something from the keyboard. We are then converting it from Celsius to Fahrenheit and displaying it on the screen. For option 2 and 3, we imagine that we read the temperature from a file or from the internet, but instead what we do is that we just assign it. But imagine that in these two cases here, we would actually read it from a file or from internet. But after that, we do something similar to what we did in the first one here. We convert the Celsius to Fahrenheit and we display it. And the last option, 9, we said keep going to false, meaning that when we loop around, we would exit the loop and the script would finish. So we have a temperature converter here, and the goal here for us now is to introduce functions to make this script a little bit easier to read and and try to avoid duplicating code or having the same code snippet in several places in our code. Do you guys remember the acronym DRY, don't repeat yourself? This is another tool we can use to do that or to avoid duplicating code. And the first thing I'm going to do here is that I'm going to move this part here, which prints the menu to its own function. So let's see if I do that. I'm going to do it to create a function that doesn't take any parameters and that don't return anything. I just want it to do something. So it could look something like this. Display menu, and we should give it some name that clearly states what it's doing. And then after that, I'm going to copy the code for it and put it up here. But now that I have introduced this new function, I must also call it. So let's do that here, display menu. So we can create functions that doesn't take any parameters and don't return anything. They just do something, like in this case, print the menu, and then we can call it. I'm just keeping track of this chat at the same time, but Niklas, just tell me if there is something that I should talk about. So here we have one type. We said that we have a few different types, or few different ways of writing functions. And the next one that I'm going to write will return something. So we will create a value returning function that it will not take any parameters, but it will return something. And I will do that for reading the temperature. So let's see how that could look. Read temperature. And what should we do in here? Well, what we're going to do in here is that we're going to read the temperature from the user, so from the keyboard. So I'm going to copy this. And why do I do this? Why do I move it into this function? Well, I'll get back to that in a second. I will just first make sure that I change the code here, so I actually call the function read temperature. So why did I move that code here? Well, imagine that we could do something like this. I'll write a comment about it. So we could, in this function, we could validate that whatever the user inputs, that it is a valid temperature. I will not do it here to keep it simple, but imagine that we could have that in here, so that we could ask the user for a temperature, and if they write their name, we can ask them to write the temperature again until they input a valid Celsius temperature. So we have one function that doesn't take any parameters and doesn't return anything. But this one, it doesn't take any parameters, but it returns something. And if it returns something, we assign that to a variable. Here it's called Celsius temperature. And the next step, to see what we can do here, to transform this code that we have to use more functions, we can create a function that takes a parameter and returns a value. And we will do that for the calculation of, or the conversion from Celsius to Fahrenheit. We see that we have it in 3 places here. If I mark it, we can see that it's duplicated in 3 places here. So let's see if we can create a function for that. If we have something like this, where we repeat the code in many places in our script, it's probably a good idea to put it into a function. So let's see. Celsius to Fahrenheit, I'll call it. I'm trying to give it a name, so the name tells me what it will do. And the parameter should be the temperature in Celsius, and it's gonna return the converted value. So what is it in Fahrenheit? That is what it should return. And we already have the calculation down here. We actually have it in 3 places. So I will copy it from down here and add it to my new function. And now that I have it, I can make sure to use it in all these 3 places in our code. So I will say that, right, the Fahrenheit temperature will be equal to whatever is returned by my function Celsius to Fahrenheit. And as an input, I should give it the Celsius temperature. and that we take from the variable that we got from reading from the user in this case. And we see that in choice 2 we can make the same change, and also in the third choice, when choice is 3 or 2, we have the same thing. All right, so why did we do this? Why did we do this change? We see that we got more lines of code. We already had it down here, so why didn't we keep it? Well, one benefit of creating a function for it is that we will see when we're finished that it is actually easier to read the code down here. Given this name, it's easier to understand quickly what it does, even if we don't know how to convert the temperatures. But there is one other thing, and that is, imagine that by mistake I had it as 2.8 times the Celsius temperature instead. In the previous way of solving it, we had to change this in 3 places. But now, when I realize my mistake, if I change it in this one place, it will take effect in all 3 cases. So we are not duplicating code, so that if something goes wrong, I only have to change it in one place. That is, if it's not duplicated. And let's see what the next step is. We have created 3 functions so far. And I think the next thing we're going to do is that we're going to do something with this. Because we see that we have duplicated that code in all 3 cases, where we actually displaying the result to the user. So I think what we will do here is that we will create a new function that it will not return anything, but it will take several parameters. We will take both the Celsius and the Fahrenheit, and we will display this text here. So let's see how that could look. And let's see, what should we call it? Display result. Always try to have meaningful names for variables and for functions. Celsius is going to be the first value that I send in, and Fahrenheit will be the second one. And what should I print? Well, I can copy it from down here because we already, as we said, have it. But if I do copy it, I have to be a little bit careful, because we see here that when I used it down here, the Celsius temperature was in the variable called Celsius temperature. When I created this function, I said, oh, I will just call it Celsius. So just make sure, if you copy your code, that you read it and change the variables as necessary. And let's see, what does it tell us? Over indented. This is also a problem that might happen. We see that it tells us that, oh, this line is over indented, and we have actually 2 spaces or 2 tabs here. So we'll move it one step back and see. All right, now it looks much better. There are 4 spaces of 1 tab here before it. Now that we have created this display result function, we can use it in all 3 cases down here. So let's see how that would look. That could look something like this. Display result. All right, we're going to call that. What are we going to send as our arguments? The first one was Celsius temperature, and the last one was Fahrenheit temperature. And then I can remove these 3 lines of code here. And I can actually do the same here. So we see that the main logic of our script is starting to decrease in size, which makes it easier to grasp what it is doing. But there is one more thing I want to change here. And we can see that in all three cases, we are doing this. We are translating or converting the Celsius temperature to Fahrenheit, storing that in a variable, and then we're displaying the result. So maybe we can do something about this. And I will create a new if statement down here, saying that, all right, if the user choose to do 1 or if it is choice is equal to 2 or choice is equal to 3. And we can see here when we read it, we don't actually read it as a number, we read it as a string. And we can see we have used a string here when we're comparing it. So we have to do the same down here. But if this is the case, what do we want to do then? If we are in one of these three cases, well, I want to do the thing that we have here. And that we just identified that we have duplicated in each case. Meaning that then I can remove it from here. And here. And here. And I think I will actually change it a little bit, because we see here we can't get here if we choose this one. Or well, we can get there, but it will not make sense to have the elif for these ones up here. I think it makes more sense to have it last, so that this piece of code here is about getting the temperature from the user or from a file or from internet, and then we handle it if it's 1, 2, or 3, and finally in the end of the loop we say that, all right, if it wasn't any of 1, 2, 3, then, and if it is 9, then all right, then we stop the loop. We haven't tried to run it yet. Let's do that and see if it actually works. And if we choose 1, temperature in Celsius is 20 degrees. We can see that, all right, it works. It converts it to Fahrenheit and prints it. And we can try option 2 too. We don't get a nice output. We are just printing it, but we can live with that for now. And we can see that the last one works too. And let's see if we can exit the script by using 9. Yes, we exited the script there. So we can see that what we have done so far is that we have simplified our mainline logic that we have here. So reading this becomes easier, and each of our function that we created have one purpose, and it's really good at doing one thing. And then we're reusing that down here. Niklas, are there any questions?
Yes, I was just writing to one here privately about the re-examination, and when they are, when are you going to open up? When are they going to be able to start doing the re-examination?
Right, so that's a good question. And I will open it up as soon as I have looked at all the submissions that we have now. And as soon as possible after that, I will open it up, but it will be well in advance before the deadline of the re-examination. But it will take a few days for me to go over all your submissions. So it will probably be next week or the week after that. But as soon as possible, I will open it up. All right. Are there any questions about what we did here when we changed it to functions so far? If you have questions, just write them in the chat, and Niklas will answer them. Because if there are no immediate questions, I think what I will do is that I will continue. There is one more thing I want to talk about before I let you start working on the tasks from lecture 6. And that is that we should try to avoid having code that is outside of functions. So we see here, if we look at the script that we have now, we have a few functions, but down here, we have some code that is not in a function. And as I said, we should try to avoid this. And in the chapter that you read for today, what they do is they put it in a function called main. And then we can say that our mainline logic for our script is in the main function. But if we do this, there is one more thing that we have to do, and that is, of course, that we have to call the main function. So now what happens, let's see here, I saw that there is a bug here. In the Celsius to Fahrenheit function, we had a bug. We were actually using the variable from Celsius temperature. We should use the parameter, just the thing that I mentioned before, that we should make sure that when we change it, we use the parameter. So luckily we spotted that before we continued, but there was a bug and it's fixed now. But we see here we have a few functions, and then now we have our mainline logic in here. So we could see this as the starting point of our script. When we run our script from in here, or if we run it from the console, this is the mainline logic. We call this function when the script starts, and then we start doing whatever we have written in here. But there is one more thing that we can do here to improve it. And instead of just writing main down here, we could write this. And what we are doing here is that we are saying that we should only run this main function if we start this script. If we, on the other hand, import this module, this file, to be used in one of our other scripts, we don't want this main function to run. In the chapter for today, they talked about modules, that you can have your code in several modules. You can divide your code into modules and store them in different files. And what we are saying here is that if we create a new script, but we want to, for example, use this function that we have in this script, in this module, the Celsius to Fahrenheit, we can use that in our new script by importing this module and saying use this function. But if we do that, we don't want to start running this script. We just want to use this function. So don't run main, just use Celsius to Fahrenheit in our new script. And for that to work, we have to write this code down here. And that is what it does. It prevents the complete script from running when we import it in another module. But if we start this script separately, it will run the main function. I hope that makes sense why we added this little piece of code here. So if we have several modules and we want to import this module to another one, then we don't want to run this complete script. We just want to use some functions. Then this is how we do it. 1 second here. I just saw that there was someone who had a video on, so I just wanted to turn it off. All right, and I think with that, I'll stop sharing this if there are no questions about this code. So what we saw here, what we did in this example was that we avoided to duplicate pieces of code in our script, and we made sure that each function had a purpose, one purpose. And we also added the main function to avoid having code that's not in a function. So we put that code into the main function, which has the mainline logic. We added an if statement saying that, all right, just run the main function when we start the script, not if we import it to another script. And that was the last thing that I wanted to talk about before you guys start working on the tasks from lecture 6. So what I will do now is that I just want to say thank you, and I will stop the recording